It happened just before 9 a.m., in the parking lot of a small-town courthouse that usually slept through mornings like this. The sun had barely climbed over the roofline. A handful of city workers smoked near the sidewalk. Birds chirped. The day began slow, like every other Tuesday. Then came the argument. A white patrol officer, red-faced and rigid, stood outside a parked sedan, gesturing wildly. The driver, an elderly black woman, sat behind the wheel with her window rolled down, her posture regal, her gaze steady. She wasn't shouting. He was. "I said move the damn car. This space is for judges only." Her voice came out calm, clear. "I'm a judge." He scoffed. Didn't check her plates. Didn't ask for ID. Just flung the door open, yanked it hard enough to rattle the frame. "Out of the car. I will win, eh?" She didn't finish. Because that's when it happened. He slapped her. Not a shove. Not a push. A full palm strike across the face, sharp enough to draw gasps from the sidewalk. The city workers froze. A barista watching from the cafe window dropped her cup. Across the lot, someone's phone came up. Then another. And another. She reached for her purse, slowly, lips bleeding, cheeks burning, not with pain, but memory. And as the officer shoved her against the hood of the car, twisting her arm behind her back, she looked toward the nearest uniform and said, "Get the chief." 4 words. Steady, measured, and devastating. The officer laughed. "Oh, you want the chief now?" But behind him, the air shifted. A younger officer, watching from the cruiser, narrowed his eyes. His mouth parted. His radio shook slightly in his grip. Because he just recognized the woman. And the slap he just witnessed? It wasn't just excessive. It was a career-ending blow. The air grew thick, not with heat, but with a silence that prickled across the skin. No one moved. The officer, still gripping her arm, hadn't noticed the sudden shift in posture from his colleagues. Hadn't seen the barista's hand shaking as she steadied her phone. Hadn't caught the glance between the 2 city workers who now stood very, very still. But the woman, Judge Vera M. Daniels, had noticed everything. She always did. Even now, her breath was steady. Her chin lifted slightly despite the sharp pain blooming at her jaw. Blood lined the corner of her mouth like punctuation. Still, she didn't scream. Didn't cry. She looked straight ahead and repeated, calmly, "Get the chief." This time, her voice was heard. One of the junior officers, brown-skinned, barely 30, lifted his radio with a visible tremble. "Dispatch," he said into the mic, "I need confirmation. We may have a situation involving Judge Daniels." A pause. Then static. Then, "Judge Vera Daniels?" "Yes." Confirmed visual. "She's been assaulted by Officer Lanning." The dispatcher didn't reply immediately. But within seconds, another voice cracked through, urgent, clipped. "This is Chief Mallory. En route." Now the change was visible. The younger officer stepped forward. "Lanning, let her go." The senior officer blinked. "Excuse me. Release her. Now." Lanning looked around, suddenly unsure. "Who the hell do you think she is?" Silence. Then a whisper from the bystander closest to them, muttered under their breath but loud enough to carry. "She's the chief judge of the appeals court, you idiot." Lanning froze. Vera pulled her arm gently from his grip, straightened her blazer, and wiped the blood from her lip with a handkerchief from her sleeve. She turned to face him. "I've sentenced men with better character for worse crimes," she said. Then added, cold and clear, "And your 4 minutes just started." At exactly 9:03 a.m., the first squad car arrived. No sirens. No drama. Just a sleek, unmarked black vehicle pulling in fast and silent, gravel crunching beneath its tires. Out stepped Chief Mallory, white shirt pressed, tie loose, face already pale. He took one look at the scene and stopped walking. There, standing in front of him, was the woman whose judicial signature had reversed 22 wrongful convictions, whose rulings had reshaped an entire generation of legal precedent, whose name was spoken with reverence by state senators and whispered with fear by corrupt attorneys. And now bruised, bleeding, standing in a parking lot next to a still-stunned Officer Lanning. Vera didn't move, didn't blink, didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Mallory turned to Lanning. "What did you do?" he asked, not because he didn't know, but because he couldn't believe it had happened on his watch. Lanning stammered. "She wasn't showing ID. I thought she said she was a judge, but..." He trailed off. The chief turned to the officer beside him. "Take his badge. Right now." Lanning's face drained. "What? Are you kidding me?" Mallory didn't answer. He was already walking toward Judge Daniels, eyes lowered in shame. "Your Honor," he said softly. I'm so. Save it." Her voice wasn't cruel. "Just done. I don't want apologies. I want accountability." She turned toward the gathering crowd. Phones still recorded. People still whispered. Mallory nodded. "It's yours." She nodded back once, then turned on her heel, walked past the cruiser, past the cameras, past the blood on her handkerchief, and up the steps into the courthouse without another word. She didn't flinch, didn't limp, just climbed. And with every step, the foundation beneath the department began to crack. The empire was starting to crumble. The footage hit social media before Judge Daniels even reached the third floor. A 6-second clip. No edits. No commentary. Just raw, shaking footage of a white officer slapping a dignified black woman in a navy skirt suit and pearls. By 9:15 a.m., it had over 20,000 views. By 9:30, it was on the front page of 2 major outlets. At 9:42, someone added captions. "She asked for the chief." He laughed. For minutes later, the chief showed up shaking. And beneath it, 3 words trending across platforms. Hashtag her name is Vera. Inside the courthouse, Judge Daniels entered her chambers. Her clerk, Rosa, sprang to her feet, eyes wide with horror. "Oh my God, Judge, are you?" "I'm fine." She wasn't. But she was ready. Vera moved to the mirror, dabbing at the blood, fixing her collar. Her reflection didn't tremble. It had seen worse. In 1963, it had stared down a police dog in Selma. In 1971, it had graduated top of its class while the dean forgot to read her name at convocation. In 1985, it had watched a man call her sweetheart in open court right before she overruled him. But today? Today it saw fire. Outside, reporters gathered like ants to honey. Inside, Vera sat down at her desk. She didn't write a statement. She wrote a court order. Emergency session. Public hearing. Live stream authorized. Every motion signed. Every document released. By 10:15, it wasn't just a slap. It was a reckoning. The department's legal counsel tried to call. She didn't answer. The mayor's office sent a bouquet. She sent it back. She didn't want roses. She wanted resignations. And in that silence, every desk in the courthouse knew. The slap wasn't the story. The woman who rose after it was. At 11 a.m. sharp, the courtroom was full. Not with attorneys. Not with defendants. But with citizens. Some in work uniforms, badges still clipped to their collars. Some in Sunday clothes, even though it was Tuesday. Students skipped class. Retirees took their usual coffee outside the courthouse doors. Phones buzzed. Heads turned. People who had never stepped foot inside a courtroom now leaned forward like jurors to history. And at the center of it all sat Judge Vera M. Daniels. No robe, just a deep blue blazer. A single bandage across her cheek. Her gavel sat untouched. She didn't need it. When she finally spoke, the room held its breath. "Before I begin," she said, voice measured, "I want to make something perfectly clear." She leaned forward slightly. "This is not about one officer. This is not about a parking lot. And this is certainly not about my pain." She paused. "This is about pattern." She picked up a file. "This is Officer Lanning's record. 17 complaints. 3 internal investigations. All closed without review." She held up another document. "This is a list of cases in which Officer Lanning testified. Convictions based, in part, on his word." Her eyes scanned the crowd. "I've reopened all of them." Gasps. But she wasn't finished. "To those who ask if I'm angry, the answer is yes. But anger didn't get me here. Law did. So let the law do what it was always meant to do. Not protect comfort, but correct power." Outside, the crowd had doubled. Inside, the silence became reverence. She looked down at the final file in front of her. Then she said, almost gently, "I will not call for his firing. That would be too small." She closed the folder. "I'm calling for a full audit of this department. From street stops to sentencing." The room erupted, and the empire trembled. By noon, the clip of her courtroom statement was everywhere. CNN, MSNBC, even local stations that usually skipped stories about judicial hearings led with the headline. Judge Vera Daniels orders sweeping police audit after assault. But it was more than the headline. It was the way she spoke. The way her voice carried, not as an echo, but a lead. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She instructed. And the country listened. Outside the courthouse, a growing crowd stood with signs they had made in minutes, not days. "We believe Vera. Power doesn't protect you from truth. Hashtag 4 minutes of truth. Back inside, officers from the department were already being called in. The chief, still pale, held a press conference by 2 p.m. He fumbled his notes. His tie looked tighter than usual. We condemn the actions of Officer Lanning. A full review is underway. We respect Judge Daniels immensely. But reporters didn't want his words. They wanted hers. She didn't show up. She didn't need to. She was already everywhere. That evening, in a private chamber, Vera met with 3 legal teams. One from the state, one from Civil Rights Council, and one, quietly, it was federal. They all said the same thing. You've opened something we can't close. Vera didn't flinch. She opened her notebook, scribbled a few lines. This isn't about opening wounds, she said. It's about exposing the ones you all said had healed. At home that night, she sat on her porch. No lights, just the stars. Her cheeks still ached. But her soul? Her soul was standing taller than ever. Because justice, when finally visible, doesn't whisper. It shines. And the slap? That was just the match. By the next morning, Officer Lanning was suspended. But that wasn't the headline. The headline was that Judge Daniels had officially referred 27 past convictions, cases where Lanning's testimony had played a pivotal role, for emergency review. Each case reopened. Each story reconsidered. Old names returned to the surface, people forgotten, dismissed, caged by a badge no one dared to question until now. One man had served 11 years for assaulting an officer during a traffic stop. Another had pleaded guilty after being promised leniency, only to vanish into a system that never gave it. And now, they were all back on the docket. The district attorney, red-eyed and rattled, gave a statement to the press. We trusted the record. We now know the record was incomplete. But it wasn't just a record. It was a wall. And Vera was tearing it down, brick by brick, with court orders, with public hearings, and most of all, with unwavering composure. Everywhere she went, people stopped her now. At the grocery store. At gas stations. A little boy even asked to take a picture with her. Are you a superhero? He whispered. She smiled gently. No, sweetheart. I'm just someone who refused to stay quiet. At the courthouse, the atmosphere had shifted. Officers stood straighter. Lawyers spoke softer. Even the echo of heels across marble carried a new weight. And then, on Thursday, something unexpected arrived. A letter. Handwritten. From a young female officer who had witnessed the slap. Judge Daniels, I didn't stop him. I was too afraid. But your strength showed me I don't have to be silent anymore. Vera folded the letter carefully. Placed it in a drawer already filling with others. Because this wasn't about her anymore. It never was. It was about the ripple. And how one moment of violence, answered with truth, had become a wave. The fallout deepened. Within days, 2 former prosecutors stepped down. 3 defense attorneys filed motions to vacate convictions. And one internal affairs officer admitted, under oath, that he had flagged Lanning's behavior years ago. No one listened, he said, until she made it impossible not to. The city's mayor called for calm. Vera didn't. She called for clarity. In a televised interview, seated beneath the seal of the state appeals court, she spoke softly. If my skin were lighter, if my body were younger, would that officer's hand have paused midair? She didn't wait for an answer. We cannot reform systems we keep apologizing for. We must rebuild them with different hands. The interviewer, visibly shaken, asked, Judge Daniels, what do you want people to take from this? She looked into the camera. That what happened to me was not rare. What was rare is that I had the title. But justice should not be reserved for those with titles. It should belong to the ordinary. And it's time we made that true. The segment ended. The internet didn't. Clips of her words spread like lit matchsticks. Civil rights groups demanded oversight. Legal organizations offered pro bono work for the reopened cases. Universities replayed her courtroom statement in criminal law classes. But Vera? She stayed the same. Each morning, she arrived at her chambers before dawn. Each night, she returned home with stacks of files, read by lamplight with quiet fury. One evening, Rosa, her clerk, asked her, Do you ever wish it hadn't happened? Vera looked up from her notes. I wish it didn't have to. She set down her pen. But I'm not sorry it did. Because the slap was a spark. And now? The city was burning with truth. The department launched a press tour to control the narrative. Chief Mallory appeared on morning talk shows with rehearsed lines and softened language. We're cooperating fully. We take integrity seriously. We are committed to transparency. But every time he spoke, Vera's silence echoed louder. Because she wasn't talking to studios or spinning sound bites. She was writing, drafting legislation with state senators, proposing a statewide use of force review board, requesting an independent audit of not just one precinct, but 5. And behind the scenes, she met with people no one else thought to ask. Wrongfully arrested teens. Mothers of men sentenced by testimony now under fire. Parolees whose voices never made it past paperwork. She filled notebook after notebook, pages and looping script, a lifetime of listening poured onto paper. The press started calling her movement the Daniels Doctrine. She didn't care what they named it. She only cared that it worked. Meanwhile, Officer Lanning's name became a symbol, graffitied on walls, crossed out on protest signs, carved into debate topics. But Vera refused to make him the sinner. "This isn't about a man," she said once. "It's about a mindset." One morning, Rosa found Vera alone in chambers, staring at a black and white photo on her desk. Her younger self, freshly robed, standing in front of the appeals court on her first day. "You still recognize her?" Rosa asked. Vera smiled faintly. Every day more than before. Outside, city buses rolled by with new banners across their sides. Justice is not a reaction. It's a foundation. Judge Vera M. Daniels. She hadn't approved the quote. Didn't even know who submitted it. But she didn't mind. Because now, justice was moving. Every hour. Every street. Every heart that watched her rise. At City Hall, change arrived like a flood. Not all at once, but fast enough that no one could deny it anymore. The mayor, who had once sidestepped police reform in every debate, now announced a partnership with Vera's new task force. "We are launching a complete departmental restructure," he said behind a podium that suddenly looked too small. The room clapped. But Vera wasn't in it. She was across town, in a circle of folding chairs at a community center on 38th Street. No press. No script. Just her, a few young organizers, and a stack of handwritten stories from people who never made the news. A man spoke first, mid-40s, eyes tired, but kind. "For years ago, Officer Lanning arrested me for loitering. I was standing outside my own apartment. Another followed, a teacher. I've had my son rehearsing what to say if he stopped since he was 8. No one interrupted. Vera wrote every word. And when it was her turn to speak, she didn't offer comfort. She offered commitment. Your stories," she said, "are policies waiting to happen." She stood, taller than ever. They told me I had too much power. What they didn't realize was, I wasn't going to keep it. I was going to give it away. Back at City Hall, aides played the live stream on a phone behind the curtains. One of them whispered, "We've never seen anything like her." But some had. They just hadn't survived long enough to be heard. That night, Vera returned home, slipped out of her shoes, and sat on her porch with a cup of tea. She looked at the night sky, not for answers, for witnesses. Because in that dark silence, she could almost hear them, the ones who came before her. And they were nodding. The following week, a letter arrived in a thick envelope, stamped with the seal of the State Attorney General's office. Inside, a formal commendation for Judge Vera M. Daniels, an offer to co-author new legislation on law enforcement transparency. A plaque, to be awarded in a televised ceremony. She read it once, then folded it neatly and placed it on the corner of her desk. Not untouched, just unfinished. Because plaques gather dust. And Vera wasn't done moving. She walked into her chambers that day and found her staff already buzzing. Rosa waved her over with urgency. They released the footage. Vera raised an eyebrow. "Which footage?" Rosa tilted the laptop screen. There it was, security camera footage from the courthouse parking lot. A full angle. Unedited. The slap. The laugh. The command, "Get the chief." The officer's face as her name dropped like a stone in still water. And then the aftermath. It played on a loop. Not just on news channels, but in classrooms, community centers, and late-night TV. Even comedians mentioned her now. She didn't just survive it, one said. She legislated it. But Vera remained grounded. She spent that afternoon writing letters to every person whose case was reopened because of the Lanning audit. Letters that began with, "This system failed you. It will not do so again, not if I have anything to say about it." Some wrote back. Some cried. Some just wrote, "Thank you for seeing me." And that, to her, was the real award. That evening, she addressed the Bar Association. Not with a speech. With a story. She told them about a girl who watched her grandfather get frisked outside a grocery store. About a woman who fought for 20 years to sit on a bench where no one looked like her. And about how justice should never wait for bruises. It should begin with truth. Fall arrived like a whisper. The trees along the courthouse lawn burned orange and gold. The air smelled of distant fires, wool coats, and something else, change. On a Tuesday morning, Vera received a small package wrapped in brown paper with no return address. Inside was a book, her own judicial opinions, compiled and bound by a group of law students from across the country. On the first page, a note. We studied your rulings. Then we studied what you did without one. Thank you for showing us what law can look like when it stands up. She closed the book quietly and smiled. Later that day, she returned to the courtroom, not to speak, not to judge, just to listen. A hearing about qualified immunity reform was being held in the very same chamber where she'd issued her emergency audit. The committee chair paused mid-session. Judge Daniels, we weren't expecting you today. Vera simply nodded. I'm just here to observe. But the air shifted all the same, because her presence now carried the weight of 1,000 headlines and the quiet strength of someone who had turned pain into precedent. Afterward, a woman approached her in the hallway. Mid-30s. Nervous. My brother was one of Lanning's arrests. You reopened his case. Vera looked into her eyes. How is he? The woman exhaled. He's home. That night, Vera returned to her porch. The wind rustled the papers on her lap, drafts of new procedures, citizen oversight models, curriculum for police academies. She picked up a pen and wrote 3 words on the first page. Begin with listening. Because justice didn't start in the courtroom. It started in parking lots, in quiet mornings, in the cracks, where truth demanded to be seen. The calls for Judge Daniels to run for office came fast and loud. Editorials praised her composure. Advocacy groups begged her to consider higher office. A national poll listed her as a top unannounced contender for the upcoming state Senate race. But Vera wasn't interested in climbing. She was interested in clearing paths. Instead of campaigning, she launched a fellowship for young legal professionals from underrepresented communities, future public defenders, civil rights attorneys, and yes, future judges. She named it not after herself, but after her grandmother, the Ruthie Daniels Justice Initiative. The first cohort met inside the very courtroom where Vera had once been silenced by the slap. Now, they filled it with questions. What's the first thing a good lawyer should learn? One asked. Vera didn't hesitate. How to listen longer than you prepare to argue. They scribbled it down like scripture. One afternoon, during a workshop, a young black woman pulled her aside. I was going to drop out, she whispered. I didn't think there was space for me in law. Until I saw you hold the system in your palm and make it speak. Vera placed a hand on her shoulder. Then stay. Because we need hands like yours building what comes next. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the courthouse dome, Vera lingered on the front steps. She watched as students laughed and argued and dreamed aloud, their voices echoing through the marble halls like thunder wrapped in promise. A janitor pushing a mop stopped and nodded toward them. You did that, he said. Vera looked at him. No, she replied. They did. I just reminded them where the door was. And as night fell, she stayed seated on those steps. Because sometimes legacy isn't a monument. It's a hand extended in the right direction. Weeks later, the courthouse prepared for a ceremony. Not for a trial. Not for a hearing, but to rename the building. The decision had passed unanimously through the city council. Even the mayor, now visibly humbled, called it the least we could do. Judge Vera M. Daniels Court of Justice. It was printed in gold across the new facade, letters freshly carved but already feeling like they had always belonged. Vera didn't want a parade. She asked for something different. Invite the people who never got to speak, she said. Let their stories bless the walls before we put my name on them. So on a clear Saturday morning, people gathered, not politicians, but citizens. A mother read a letter her son wrote from prison after his conviction was overturned. A teacher shared how her 4th graders watched Vera's hearing and decided to write essays on justice. A formerly incarcerated man stood at the podium and simply said, I got my life back because you refused to sit down. When it was Vera's turn, she walked to the microphone with a single sheet of paper. She didn't read it. She folded it and looked at the crowd. I didn't ask for this honor, she said, but I accept it for the bruised voices, for the silenced witnesses, for every person who thought justice was a door they'd never be allowed to knock on. She turned slightly, motioning to the building. This name? Let it mean responsibility, not reverence. Let it be a reminder that no position, no title, no robe is more important than the people it serves. Applause followed. Loud. Long. But Vera simply stepped back. Because the building had her name now. And she had something greater. A city finally willing to listen. It was a quiet morning again. Weeks had passed since the ceremony, but something still called her back. The same street. The same parking lot. The same cracked concrete where everything had started. Vera stood beside her old sedan. Same model. Same color. She looked at the faint chalk outline someone had left, not an official marker, just a message scrawled in soft pink. This is where truth stood. She didn't erase it. She didn't step around it. She stood directly on top of it and smiled. That afternoon, she returned, not with a gavel, not with news crews, but with folding chairs. Volunteers arrived with clipboards. Students carried microphones and speakers. One by one, people filled the space, not just citizens, but officers, teachers, bus drivers, teenagers with too many questions and not enough safe places to ask them. It wasn't a protest. It wasn't a lecture. It was a forum. In the same lot where her dignity was questioned, Vera created space for dialogue. A high schooler asked, "How do we stop fearing each other?" A young officer replied, "By showing up, especially when it's uncomfortable." Vera listened. She didn't moderate. She let the community moderate itself. And by sundown, the parking lot had become something else. A courtroom without walls. A church without pews. A city's first real conversation with itself. As people began to pack up, someone handed Vera a single daisy, delicate, yellow, stubborn in its softness. She held it gently, then placed it on the ground, right beside the chalk. No ceremony, just presence. Because the system didn't crumble the day she was struck. It began to rebuild the day she stood back up.